wait one more minute. Eric comes. I just texted him. Okay.
Thought I heard somebody say
That's
just a
what
second ago.
That's what I thought. I heard too.
Hopefully it's not a.
You're waiting music.
All right, Madam Clerk, could we please, well, let's, I guess we'll stand for a Pledge of Allegiance first, right? It's. I am the alternate. So in full disclosure, came into the back room for another to meet with someone else. And Kayla came and said, "Oh, you're here, the meeting's starting, you're supposed to chair it." And I'm like, I am? So, but I'm.
It's okay. I think they got me lined up to chair it if you're okay with that. Or Eric.
That's
Yeah, if you're okay with
beautiful.
that. Okay.
Oh, now wait, we want to arm wrestle over it? That's great. No, I saw it come through on my email, but I didn't actually read the email. I didn't realize I was being asked, but that's perfect.
Okay, great.
So let's do it.
All
Ready
right.
to go?
Yes.
Okay, we'll call a meeting for the Wyandotte Creek Groundwater Sustainability Agency to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we get the roll call, please?
Yes. Kyle Daly,
Here.
Eric Smith,
Here?
Todd Kimmelshoe, Steve Coate,
Scott
say?
Coach.
Coach. Sorry.
And it's Scott.
Oh, Scott. I'm so sorry. Scott
Here.
Coach. And Rick Wilburn. Thank you.
All right. I'm just going to hop in here real quick. As you can see, we have like a bunch of new people in the room. So I'll just introduce myself really quick. I'm Cami Loser, Director of Water and Resource Conservation for Butte County. As you can see, we have all of our alternates except for one primary director here. We have Kayla, who is now clerking for us. We also have Fred Mayo from the City of Oroville, who is representing Public Works. And then, of course, the staff with Christina and Chris Heindel. So welcome, everyone. Also, I just wanted to note, since both the way our bylaws read is that since both the chair and vice chair are not here, and even though their alternates are here, we typically would elect a chair pro tem of who the remaining primary directors. We only have one primary director here, which is Kyle, so by default, he will be serving as chair today.
I just wanted to make one more, full disclosure, I served on this board for several years.
Yeah.
So I am, you're all thinking, this guy's just kind of stepping in.
You know, you are right. You are
So
absolutely
I am
right.
familiar with,
Yeah.
obviously, the goings-on.
Yeah, so great. And
yeah.
I'm sure you guys have all been tracking the happenings of the GSA over the last, actually, especially the last year, since we'll be talking about the fee studies or the appeals process in a little bit. But yes, you're absolutely right, Eric. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Next thing on the list, I think is.
Do I need to accept a motion?
I don't. I'm going to have county counsel, legal counsel weigh in. Since Andrew, since Kyle's the only primary here, do we need a motion, or is he by default the chair?
I think by default, Director Daly has the honor of chairing this meeting.
All right.
Yes.
We're going to get there one way or the other. Okay. Normally we would ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting, but however, since all the board members and alternates were not present at the last GSA meeting, we will not be able to accept the motion to approve those minutes, and we'll just address those at the next meeting. And then on to regular business.
Yes, and actually, I'm going to go back to public comment. There is an opportunity here that this is a time for the public to address the board on any matter not already listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, and the Wyandotte Creek GSA board cannot take any action at this meeting on requests made under this section of the agenda. So if there is anyone in the audience that wants to speak on anything not on the agenda, this would be the time to do it. All right, looks like we don't have any comments, so we'll move on to item 4 then.
Okay, item number 4, recommend appointments to the GSA board.
All right, so thank you, Chair Daly. Again, Cami Loser, Director of Water and Resource Conservation. The primary domestic well user stakeholder director position, that's a mouthful, term expired on August 27th, 2023. And as per the Joint Powers Agreement, or the JPA Amendment Number 1, Article 7, Section 7.3b, the GSA Board confirms a nomination for the domestic well user stakeholder director from a list of qualified nominees submitted to Butte County pursuant to an open application process specified in the bylaws. The Wyandotte Creek Board of Directors nomination will be presented to the Board of Supervisors for consideration. For appointment, the Butte County Board of Supervisors shall consider the nominees at a regular meeting and shall appoint the domestic well user stakeholder director. The Butte County Clerk of the Board and Department of Water and Resource Conservation issued a notice of vacancy for the non-agricultural domestic well user position from August 24th, 2023 to September 13th, 2023, which is a 21-day notice period that the county does. And the department sent notices announcing the opportunity to apply for the stakeholder director position on its distribution list and announced the opportunity to apply on the Wyandotte Creek GSA website. And we had also mentioned during several of the fee study meetings and public meetings that we had that there were vacancies, and solicited stakeholders then to come apply. The clerk of the board received one application for former Wyandotte Creek GSA Board Director, Mr. William Bynum, and Mr. Bynum meets the eligibility requirements for appointment and is the incumbent for the non-agricultural domestic well user seat, having served in that capacity since 2019. The department is continuing to outreach to stakeholders to solicit interest in the alternate position for the agricultural user seat, which remains vacant, which would be the alternate to Director Daly's position. So A staff recommendation is review the application and confirm a nomination for the primary domestic well user stakeholder director position to be presented to the Board of Supervisors for consideration for appointment. And Director Kimmelshoe, I think this was one of the ones that you abstained from or recused yourself from for Vina GSA as well.
Okay. Is there any comment? Is there any public comment?
None received.
I'll entertain a motion.
I move to accept.
Is there a second?
Just so I'm clear on this, so we're accepting it, and then, but also the open seat.
So today it's just accepting the application for Mr. Bynum to be recommended to the Board of Supervisors for appointment. There is no application for the alternate seat for the agricultural user director, and so that one will continue to remain vacant.
It's vacant, okay. Yeah, I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
All right.
All opposed?
And I'll abstain. Or,
Perfect.
Recuse.
yeah, recuse myself.
Thank you. Who seconded that? I'm sorry.
Director Smith.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion carries. And then item number 5.
Okay. All right, thank you, Chair Daly. So this is appointments to the Wyandotte Creek Advisory Committee, or the WAC. The Wyandotte Creek Groundwater Sustainability Agency, I'm sure you all know, GSA, receives input and recommendations on the Groundwater Sustainability Plan development and implementation from the WAC as memorialized in the WAC Charter, which is dated 2021. The intent for the WAC is to provide community perspective and participation in SGMA implementation and is comprised of members representing the beneficial uses and users of groundwater identified by SGMA. Members must live or work in or represent an organization with a presence in the Wyandotte Creek subbasin and may not concurrently serve on the GSA board. The GSA board appoints at-large members to fill the advisory committee seats, and interested individuals apply to the GSA. So for the last several years, there have been some vacant seats, 4 vacant seats, which consist of 2 domestic well users, 1 environmental representative, and 1 business representative. And especially during the fee study process, again, we had many people that were interested in participating in the process, and we solicited to those people that there were some vacancies, and we suggested that some of them apply when we kind of revisited the vacancies for the WAC. So we solicited applications for the vacancies starting in September. 2 candidates, Colleen Duncan and Gretchen Klingenbeard, applied to the domestic well representative seats, and no other applications were received. And so we have reviewed those applications. They're included in your packet, and the Wyandotte Creek GSA board should consider appointing a member to the WAC to provide direction to the management committee and input on all of the work that we have been doing. So we recommend that 2 appointments to the domestic well user seats be appointed with terms ending in 2025, and that would be for Ms. Colleen Duncan and Ms. Gretchen Klingenbeard.
Gretchen's here, did you want to say?
If you can. If you'd like, you can go up to the podium. If not, you're good.
Well, I'm interested in the.
You want to go up to the podium? That way the recording can capture you.
Sorry, Gretchen. I put
You put.
Yes, I'm interested in the position. This is a new field for me, the groundwater field, but I want to learn more about it and help the community with what needs to be done. Any questions?
Thank you for your application.
Okay.
Okay. Does the board have any comment? Is there any public comment?
None received.
Okay, close public comment, and I will entertain a motion.
I would move the two candidates.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 6.
All right, consideration of approval of a user classification change and appeal process policy, and that is our presentation. So we'll do a little presentation today. And I'll have to remember my slides, I didn't print them out. Okay, next slide, please. So, actually go back one, let me give some background. So as you know, the Wyandotte Creek GSA used a Proposition 218 process to approve a property-related fee to fund overall costs associated with the GSA administration, implementation of the GSP, or the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and SIGMA compliance costs. The Wyandotte Creek GSA approved a multi-user fee structure based on parcels, land use, and source of water. And so we're going to cover this appeal process. I'm going to go over some background of the fee, and then we'll get into the purpose and need of this user classification change and appeal process. And we do have handouts for those in the audience that want to take a look. Next slide, please. So as you hopefully know, the GSA board adopted new fees on July 27th, 2023, having gone through the whole Proposition 218 fee process, which included identifying the budget or revenue needs of the GSA over the course of the next 5 years, and then looking at alternative fee structures and fee options, and then ultimately landing on a user class 3 user class fee. The fee that will be charged is a cost per acre per year. And so on that July 27th, they adopted the maximum fee charged, which is listed there. But for the fiscal year, they adopted a slightly lesser fee. So the fees are, for the 3 user classes, are the non-irrigated fee, irrigated surface water user, and irrigated groundwater user, and then those are the associated fees. So what that means is each year we will come back and look at the next fiscal year's budget, and the board will adjust the fee that would be charged on the tax roll based on the revenue needs. But the maximum fee that can be charged is the $1.38 for non-irrigated, $8.98 for irrigated surface water, and $13.86 for irrigated groundwater users. Next slide, please. So as part of the adoption of the fee, staff also presented a draft framework for input and direction from the board. And the framework would be to develop a process for user classification changes and an appeal process. So each parcel within the GSA boundaries was identified as a certain user class, whether it's irrigated, non-irrigated, irrigated surface water, or irrigated groundwater. And they also directed this board also directed staff to develop an option for fees based on multiple user classes on one parcel. There are some larger parcels that do have or use groundwater, surface water, and are non-irrigated. So we did discuss that and included that in the framework. All right, and then once we drafted, so we presented a draft, kind of an overview of that process, and then kind of added to it and took it to the advisory committee for review and input. And they provided comments on that draft process, and those comments were incorporated into the policy that's before you today. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the process or the policy is to allow changes in in designated classifications to ensure that the parcels are properly classified in the right user class, and the fee being charged is the correct fee. It also allows us to accommodate changes in land use and water source over time that necessitates reclassification. It identifies the application and review process, timelines, roles, and responsibilities of GSA staff and the landowner as they apply. And if, depending on if when they apply for a user class change, if they are denied that, they have an opportunity to appeal to the board. Next slide, please. So just to review some of the definitions, the policy does have definitions, and so I'll just go over those briefly here. The non-irrigated user class includes parcels that are considered open space, natural habitat, vacant, dry land farmed, or rangeland, and this may include parcels that are located within a water provider service area boundaries but are not irrigated. So yeah, just to be clear on that. Next slide, please. The irrigated surface water user class, these are parcels that primarily use surface water, which may include parcels within a water provider service area, such as Thermalito Water and Sewer District. We also have South Feather and Cal Water. Or have individual water rights or permits for surface water allocations directly from a creek, stream, or another source. Parcels that use surface water in combination with groundwater in a supplemental fashion, so the groundwater is not their primary source, but it might be a backup, are also classified as irrigated surface water users. And then urban areas that primarily use surface water and are served by water providers. Next slide, please. So irrigated groundwater user class are parcels that use groundwater and do not have access to or the right to use surface water supplies. These parcels will typically have a well on the parcel serving as the primary source of water. This user class also includes typically includes the unincorporated areas that are not within a water provider's service area or community served by a groundwater-based small community water system. Next slide, please. Other definitions included in the process or the policy document are as parcel acreage, which is the total acreage of the parcel subject to the fee based on the county assessor parcel data. We also added in parcel acreage for GSA boundary parcels, and this has come up on, as you know, the boundary, particularly the eastern boundary of the subbasin was defined by the State Department of Water Resources Bulletin 118, and that boundary just kind of cut through parcels. And so we have those boundary parcels where we had to individually calculate those parcels in the acreage for the fee. So unfortunately, the eastern boundary did not follow parcel lines. So the fee is charged to that portion of those parcels that are actually within the subbasin. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear in the document. Next slide, please. So as part of this process, again, there's a user classification change request. And as I said before, the parcels have been assigned one user class. Landowners can request a reclassification under essentially the following condition, which is, it should say miscategorized or mischarged, but miscategorized and non-irrigated, irrigated surface water, or irrigated groundwater. So if the parcel just has the wrong classification, and there could be many reasons for that, the way we formulated the designation was based on some land IQ data, land use mapping, just the existing data that we had, and some of that. For instance, there might be a parcel that has an olive orchard, as what has come up for us, where it's not irrigated at all. For whatever reason, it's just it can exist without being irrigated. And so those were probably typically either classified as irrigated surface water or irrigated groundwater, depending on where they are. And so a landowner may want to come in and say, it's just a dry land orchard. I don't have a well on the site, and they would fill out an application indicating that information, and we can reclassify them. They can also apply if the fee assessment is incorrect as a result, usually of the wrong, incorrect user classification, and the parcel, the land use or the water source is changed, meaning it's gone from irrigated or non-irrigated to irrigated and such, or they've switched from groundwater and now have access to surface water. And so they can request a reclassification then. Next slide, please. Sure.
On that, what if all of the orchard that's not irrigated, but there's a well on the property?
Yeah, so we have had people come in, and for instance, one gentleman came in and he said exactly that. Yes, I do have wells on the site, but he actually doesn't have electricity to those wells. There's no way that he can run them, and it's just essentially the olive orchard without using water. And so those are things that can be included in the application. And so when we go through the process of reviewing them, we can verify that, or they've demonstrated that they're not using the wells. If they say they're wells that they've abandoned, we would probably suggest that they properly abandon it. But I think we would, for this process, tend to err on the side of being a little more lenient. But we would be able to review the parcels for that. Next slide, please. And then there's a second condition, and this was the condition that the board had asked us to kind of look at, and it wasn't a part of the fee process, but to look at the option for multiple user classifications on parcels. And so one of the things that we did as with the WAC is identified kind of a minimum parcel size, that if it's under 10 acres, then we wouldn't, if people were to say, well, I have a little bit of groundwater, if it's a 6-acre parcel, I irrigate some, I don't. And we thought that 10 acres was a good starting cutoff to then, if people have multiple water sources and uses on their site, on their parcel, then we could start evaluating that parcel based on the different classes. And so this says parcels that are 10 or more acres in size may be reclassified with multiple user classes. Each user class, and hopefully this makes sense, must consist of at least 25% of the total parcel acreage to request the user fees be recalculated using multiple user classes. Meaning, if you have a 100-acre parcel, 25%, and it has multiple user classes, and you want to say at least 25% of the non-irrigated of the parcel is non-irrigated, another 25% is groundwater, and 50% is, hopefully my math just added up to 100%, 50% is surface water, then we would look at all three of those classifications. But if you said 10% is just is non-irrigated and 90% is surface water, then we'll say no, we wouldn't really look at that. It's 100% would be designated as surface water user class. Does that make sense? And hopefully,
what was the threshold for the classification used for for the one we've done now? Like, how did we allocate a classification for different parcels?
So the way we used more of the land IQ data. So looking at that data, it would talk about the type of, and hopefully Christina can add in here, if it was orchard or rice, and then utilizing some other information from that to identify if it was groundwater or surface water. If land was located within a water provider's service area, then it was designated as irrigated surface water. And I think maybe some of the larger parcels that were obviously, when they compared the land IQ data, if it was non-irrigated, there was nothing on it, or there was it was grazing land or range land, then it would have been designated non-irrigated.
Okay, so those different land use parcels, they
they were classified into one. So let's say there was one that was, like, I'll use the dry olive orchard because that seems to be the example that we've gotten a couple times, is that it was designated as either groundwater or surface water, based on whatever information. I haven't looked at each of them specifically, and they have come in saying, I don't irrigate it. And so that one would be changed to non-irrigated, but the whole parcel was designated that.
Right. So if we get away from like the kind of like abandoned olive orchard scenario, like if we go to something that's got like rice ground within, like a 20 or 40 acre piece of farm ground that's within like a larger parcel, how was that classified?
So let's say the larger parcel was surface water, then it was classified as surface water. So if you have a 20-acre parcel of rice, let's say, and then the rest was non-irrigated, I would have to look at it specifically.
Right.
So I didn't go through all of the
Right, yeah. There's a
the
lot.
parcel. There's a lot.
Yep.
But this is allowing for the opportunity for when people get their bill and they're like, whoa, I thought I would have been non-irrigated. That's, 100 times $1.16 is a whole lot different than 100 times $13.86. And so in those instances, you could come in and say, look, 25 acres of this 100 is irrigated, surface water or groundwater. 75 acres is non-irrigated. I want to have the multi-user class applied. Yeah.
If we get this approved today, will we be able to implement it to begin the process for this most recent round of?
I
most
think
recent
that
tax bill?
would be dependent on some direction from the board. So maybe when we get to that point, the way the process is written now is that people would have to pay the fee and then we would go through that process. We do have a very small window of time right now to be able to, except I say this and I don't want 3,000 people to come in with user class change requests, but there is a small window of time where we might be able to get a change in and a new tax bill issued that would reflect the multi-user class.
Okay.
So, but I think that would be contingent upon direction from the board on how, but right now, the way the process is written is that it would be after the fees are paid and then by a time, there's a timeline in here.
Right. That makes sense. I was just curious if it would be simpler if we could get it straightened out before people paid. And would it make it simpler for the county and everyone if we had the process available now to get it fixed before people paid
It depends on how many people would want the change.
Yeah.
And I don't know at this point how many people
Right.
would be requesting the change. That is something that staff is looking into, just based on retaining a consultant to help us with some of the technical components of this, implementing this process.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Thank goodness for the slides. I would never have remembered where I was. All right, so the reclassification process. So the landowner would complete the application in order for the request to be processed. They would have, for the timeline to follow, and this speaks to your question, Director Daly, must show proof of payment of the fee no later than January 15th of the fiscal year of the fees levy. So if and this first year, we might make an exception to do just specifically what we said. In subsequent years, people will have already received the fee, and then it could just be following this timeline, which would be January 15th. So if the proof of payment is required, which the first bill is due December 10th, then people would have a little over a month to come in and apply for the change. And the reason why there's the January 15th, there are deadlines with the auditor tax collector's office that we would have to meet in order for them to be able to process any kind of refund. And then it would have to be timely filed by that January 15th mark. Staff would conduct an initial review within 30 days of receiving that, and the GSA program manager or designee would be authorized to make the change. So what the policy is asking the board to do is to authorize staff to be able to do these initial reviews, make the change if it's applicable, or deny the request, and then we would send back the answer, the response, and then if they wanted to appeal it, it would come to the board. And then ultimately, the determination would be provided within 45 days of receipt of the request. And so that's where that January 15th timeline comes in. Next slide, please. The GSA will require that the landowner, a landowner signature attesting to the change and any imposed conditions. So if we do assign a change or reclassify, the landowner would agree to notify the GSA of any changes in land use, installation of wells. If, for instance, if they said, this is non-irrigated, I don't even have any wells, and that was the basis of our decision, and they install wells, they would let us know. We typically probably would, well, at least the department would know, because they are processed from environmental health through our department as well, reviews them, so we might catch ya. And then some other conditions here, changes of irrigation practices, non-irrigated to irrigated, or groundwater to surface water, or vice versa. And then notice of those changes would be provided to the GSA by April 30th, so that changes, so this is just generally, you've been approved, and then later something changes, you would have to notify us of those changes so we can get them on the next year's tax roll. And then a refund of fees would be processed through the Butte County Auditor Controller's Office. And we thought about, okay, we'll just write some checks, right? But apparently we have to go through the Auditor Controller's Office because it is the tax bill. So we want the tax bill to be correct. That's what auditors are for. Next slide, please. So in the case of a denial, staff will notify the landowner of the denial and indicate how the landowner may appeal the decision to the board in writing. Next slide, please. So the reclassification process for condition 2, which is the multi-user class, it's the same as the first if you were misclassified, but then we would also add how the non-irrigated and irrigated surface water acres, how we measure that. So we would be analyzing that in a little more detail. And if approved, the staff will adjust the fee to determine the irrigated acres. And we would just round up to the next closest 5% increment. So if it's 63 acres are going to be irrigated surface water, we would round up to 65 acres. Just makes math a little easier. Next slide, please. The appeals process. So landowners who submitted a user classification change request and are denied the request may appeal the decision within 15 days of delivery of that determination. The appeal would be placed on the agenda for the next available board meeting. And the board shall receive evidence and hear from the appellant and staff, and the board may grant the appeal in whole or in part or deny it at its sole discretion. Next slide, please. And then that determination would be memorialized in the minutes, and then if there's any kind of financial relief, the GSA reserves the right to rescind that, especially if the information is found to be inaccurate. Next slide, please. So if there's any questions, I'll take questions, but the recommendation is to approve the user classification change and appeal process policy and or provide direction to the management committee and staff. Lots of good questions Kyle had asked. Is there any more clarification that I could provide? We've had, so when people started receiving their tax bill, we did get a lot of calls. I don't know, probably 5 to 10 a day separating, I can't really separate out from Vina or Wyandotte, but several calls explaining the fee, what it is. And then we have had some inquiries about in Wyandotte, especially because of the multi-user class and the fee, especially for irrigated groundwater being so different from irrigated surface water and non-irrigated. So I would say we've had probably a half a dozen instances where people have come in and said, how can I have the fee adjusted for? And they're relatively large parcels. I think the smaller ones it hasn't been significant, but they are larger parcels.
I have a question regarding the rounding. So,
Oh God, don't ask me about math.
well,
Okay.
all right. Well, the rationale is makes the math easier. So 63 goes to 65, and there may be some farmers, again, not being super familiar with looking at a map, but oftentimes you have multiple parcels. So I could just see if I'm a farmer and I own 10 different parcels, 62 acres, 51, and it keeps getting rounded up. That could actually add up a bit.
It would be per parcel. So each parcel would be separated out. So,
Right, and that's
yeah.
that's my point. So if I'm a farmer and I have 10 or 15 parcels and I'm getting rounded up, that actually could add up to hundreds of dollars, potentially. Just again, I'm being hypothetical.
Right.
And so given that the fee structure is already got sense in there, I don't quite get the rationale.
Yeah.
It breaks down a little bit for me. If it was $10, $5, and it wasn't point something,
Right.
I could maybe buy into that rationale. But was that a board decision, or was that just more on the other end, just
in the
thinking
examples that we had been following, I will say that the what would be dividing up the acres wouldn't be surveyed acres either. So it might be looking at a parcel map that has been overlaid onto an aerial where someone might say this acreage is roughly, and we might be able to measure it out and say these 25 acres or so are irrigated rice, groundwater irrigated rice. And so that part won't be they won't be surveyed maps to get it precise. If they wanted to get it that precise, then we wouldn't have to round. But if it's a rough estimate, and
I
so
could see if you're parsing that up, that gets a little more
Yeah.
nuanced. But APNs, obviously, everyone's pretty precise on the actual measurement.
Right.
But
not for the uses within.
But not for
yeah.
if you're getting into this argument about multi-use. I get that. I just don't like the roundup thing.
Okay.
Just saying.
That's
I,
good. Yeah,
I
that's
don't
a
like
great
that. I just because I could see where someone could, it could add up, a couple $100 is a couple hundred potentially,
Well,
hypothetically.
I think it would just be rounded up to the nearest, like if it's 63 acres to 65, if it's 78 acres to 80. But it doesn't have to be that way, whatever the board.
I'm just
wishes.
running into math,
Yeah.
so that's $13.68 times 3 and a roundup, that starts, and then hypothetically, again, we're just dealing with, what if scenarios. But I just think if it's 63 acres, it should be, times whatever that fee is.
Well, and frankly, that was during the fee study, that is what we talked about. It was an acreage fee, and then it does get a little convoluted where we really are doing a parcel charge. And so we're kind of overlapping two things. We're trying to figure out how many acres are within the parcel. So it's just gotten incredibly kind of complicated. We get the vote by the parcel, we get charged by the parcel, and then the classifications are broken up by a percentage of the parcel. So it seems like it's less about acreage and more about the parcel.
Right. Well, we can change that. So it could be exact. If you want to be more exact, it could be as long as it's over a certain percentage. I don't know if this board wants, if you want to do it for whatever's on the parcel, we could do that. If 10 acres out of 100 is irrigated surface water, and 90 acres is non-irrigated, well, it's up to you.
I guess that's a question for staff. is it easier that way or is it easier this way? Because it seems like this is adding another step to the quantifying of what's one classification versus the other, or is this the easier way to?
It could probably be either way. We don't know how complicated it is. We haven't had to really do it yet. So, I mean, now is the time to make that change. Yeah.
To me, you just throw it into a Excel spreadsheet, and it's already got calculations in there, and it's just you throw your numbers in. I mean, not to get too deep into the weeds on the process, but I would think it wouldn't be too tough once you have your template designed. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just a fill-in, so I don't.
No,
wanna get-
absolutely. Well, that's why you're
Just
here.
cut.
You know,
Yeah, because
Possibly.
yeah.
But
We
I
c-
think you're gonna be using
I,
to figure that out.
yeah, we're going to ask the landowners to provide their information, and we'll verify it to the best of our ability, and we can take that out. Okay. So your suggestion would be to take out the roundup and just do exact
actual,
acreage.
yeah, whatever,
actual.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and then how we get to 100%, so
Yeah.
then there it is. So you fill in populate your values, and it gets to 100%, and there it is.
And what about a minimum amount within the parcel? So like we say 25%, it should at least be 25% of a user class in the multi-user classes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this a good opportunity for public comment?
We'll have a time. We'll have a time for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for smaller parcels, it probably is a little bit more complicated, but then when you get to like the larger parcels, and I guess I'm just trying to kind of figure out exactly how, like if it's like a 300-acre parcel with, 80 acres of rice or something in it, like that is, or however the math works out, but you see what I mean? Like that could be like, it could be quite a bit of
Yeah.
just those thresholds, I think could become an issue if we're not careful of where we
And
put them.
I think that's where you give staff the discretion to really look at that. If you're going to make a case that, let's say you have 1,000 acres and only 100 of it is in one and the rest, but that I would understand 100 times, whichever we're multiplying it, it could be a significant difference, and you could give staff that flexibility. It might be on the smaller parcels where we say really, it's 2.5 acres times, or 2 acres out of 10 is,
Right, yeah.
something. So maybe there's that discretion, or we might not. You could choose not to have the minimum, or just let staff have that discretion and use error on the side of being lenient.
Back in the day, FSA used to have all that documents, at least on rice fields. That might be, another way for them to prove their point.
Yeah.
There's other ways of coming up with how much that's actually irrigated. And I think that's the issue would be how much is irrigated and at what source.
Yeah.
Regarding the pay under protest, how will people be notified about that? And then how will they be informed of what to do and how to do it as well?
Yeah. So what we're doing right now, what staff is doing right now, is we're looking at the various sizes and classifications of the parcels that under this process, and so the ones that might have multi-user classes, we could come up with a notification process, a mailer. Obviously, we have everyone's address, so perhaps parcels that might have multi-user classes, we could specifically reach out to them, just notify people through various avenues.
Okay, yeah, I think there probably needs to be some kind of notification process to let landowners know. Is there any other comment? Okay, we'll open it for public comment.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Williams-Shear, and I'm mostly just kind of a member of the public, but my brother does own land next to you in Wyandotte, and he has about 80 acres there. And so I just am thinking about his property specifically. I think the 25% isn't the way to go on larger properties. So I think the idea is not to nickel and dime staff's time with small changes that have a small effect. If you have a 10-acre parcel and it's like rural residential and they've got some pasture or something, the 25% might be worthwhile there, but the cost savings to them is also quite a bit lower and it takes the same amount of time. Whereas if it's a larger parcel, the cost savings is more significant to say, I'm not irrigating this, it's not planted, I don't want to pay these higher fees, I want to pay the lower fees on this land. And so I think the 25%, let's say you had an 80-acre ranch, you had two 40-acre parcels, one of them you have 15 acres unplanted because it's next to, for instance, Wyandotte Creek. You can't plant right up to the creek. Nobody wants you to plant right up to the creek. So you also don't want to make that investment for groundwater sustainability where you're not doing any irrigating. You're letting that natural water body have more room to roam. And then because the rest of the parcel is irrigated, you get kicked into that category. So I'm just reacting to this for the first time, hearing this today. I didn't look at it in advance, but I'm wondering if on a larger parcel, like 10 acres makes sense as a threshold. So instead of, we're not going to carve out 5 acres if you're like 160-acre parcel, but maybe some other threshold besides percentage. Thanks.
Any suggestions on how we do it?
Well, I said 10 acres.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of, if it's
10 acres or less than it, or
25 or 10 acres or whichever is larger, smaller, whatever way that would go, it wouldn't always be the same. I think on a smaller parcel, a 10-acre parcel, you'll probably go by the percentage, but on a larger parcel, the idea is just to not waste staff's time. But I think that that's a cost savings that landowners will appreciate, them not feeling nickel and dimed either, and at the same time not wasting staff's time. So 10 acres is what I would say.
I would say in response to that, and thank you, Jenny, I appreciate it. Next time, come to the WAC.
I know. I was in Harvard.
I know. I know. It was bad timing. I would say with the perhaps not having the 25 percentage for parcels larger than 10% or larger than 10 acres. And we were using 10 acres as a cutoff. So if you had less than 10 acres, we weren't going to divvy up and do a multi-user class on your parcel. So maybe just anything over 10 acres, you would consider a multi-user class without any differentiation between the different types of user classes. So anything over 10 acres, we would just look at that parcel based on what user classes are present.
That seems reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And then parcels that are under 10 acres, you are the user class that you've been designated. And a change is only if it's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That seems reasonable.
You capture that? Okay.
Okay. Is there any more public comment?
There's not.
Okay, I will close public comment, entertain a motion.
I would move to approve the user classification changes that we spoke about. Should I get more direct with that?
With taking out the roundup language on multi-user class and taking out the 25% threshold, any parcel over 10 acres would be available to go for a multi-user.
That is
Okay. Would it be 10 acres and over? Okay.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
This might be one of those situations where the primary board members, they get assigned things and then they have to live with the repercussions of it.
What are those alternates do?
Right.
I mean,
We're
those
sitting there
guys
stirring
messed
the
everything
pot.
Yeah, they can come back. All right. It's you next. Do you want to sit here?
Sure. Or I can just go.
Okay.
It was on. Okay, good afternoon. Christina Buck with the Department of Water and Resource Conservation, and want to present to you today the annual work plan. So this is something that we had Stan Tech, who's helping us with some of the GSA administration work, helped us put together this annual work plan for the GSA, and it has kind of two primary functions. Can you go to the next slide? One is to outline our expected activities and focus for this coming year in 2024. I think for the benefit of the board to know kind of what we expect to be doing, and for the public as well to have expectations of what the GSA will be up to, but also anticipating that the department plans to be hiring the GSA program manager in the next few months, hopefully. And so that new employee will also have a good roadmap to understand kind of what the scope of their focus will be in 2024. So there are 5 main tasks that are described in the work plan with subtasks under each of these 5 primary functions. And I'll just kind of go over each of them. Next slide, please. First of all, of course, the administration of the GSA boards, which is this board, the management committee, and the stakeholder advisory committee, the WAC, just managing those meetings and agendas, et cetera, for that outward facing, transparent, and public interface opportunity of the GSA. The second main function will be to advance the projects and management actions that are described in the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, specifically the grant-funded projects. So you may recall that we did just receive the letter of notification of the $5.5 million award for Wyandotte Creek GSA, so we're responding to that. And these projects that are listed in the work plan are those grant-funded projects. And so this is the work that will be focused on. We'll begin to get some requests for proposals out in the coming weeks and get consultants on board to begin that work. So really 2024 will be the kickoff of much of that work on these projects. The third function or main category is just the ongoing sustainable groundwater management program activities. So these are things like the annual report that has to be done, the monitoring that's required, maintaining and utilizing the interested parties list to keep people informed of what the GSA is up to, and the outreach and engagement activities of the GSA. And then next slide, please. The fourth piece is just all the activities it takes to run the GSA as an agency. So this is the budgeting work, managing the cost share agreements that you're going to hear more about later, the GSA fee implementation and the policy that you adopted, all of that work of just running the GSA. And then the fifth piece is really coordination, both at conferences and forums, but also interdepartmental with Butte County and our departments, as well as other kind of regional GSAs, and being the point of contact to the Department of Water Resources as well. So those are the 5 kind of key categories of activity, and those subcategories welcome your input on any of the detail or the big picture here, and looking for you to adopt this annual work plan for next year. And this is something that we would bring, I think, each year to kind of provide that roadmap of what the GSA will set out to do in the coming year.
So the spend down, so that's a $5 million+ grant. And then so that's the workload projects. And so spent over how many?
2.5 years.
2.5.
So spring of 2026, okay. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any public comment? Thank you.
None received.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah. So I move that we accept the annual work plan for the Wyandotte Creek GSA as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item 8.
I think I had additional slides on the,
Oh, shoot.
did you close it?
That's okay. I can pull it.
Okay. Is it still on there? All right. Thank you, Chair Daly. So the next item is the cost share agreement between the Wyandotte Creek GSA, the Vina GSA, perfect, and the County of Butte for a GSA program manager. Next slide, please. So as you know, the
And just so the clerk knows, this is
okay.
correct.
Yes. All right, so the County of Butte is a member of agency of both the Vina and Wyandotte Creek GSAs by the Joint Powers Authority, or JPA, and has been providing financial and in-kind administrative management and technical services to the GSAs, both Wyandotte and Vina, to fulfill activities required by SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Per Section 12.3 of the JPAs, of both JPAs, it allows the GSA to engage the member agencies, one or more of the member agencies, to manage the business of the GSA. So a GSA program manager, through the fee study process, when we were identifying revenue needs and the budget for each GSA, we reviewed and analyzed the best way to continue managing the GSA, and we looked at the cost of a consultant, whether the GSA should amend their JPA and hire their own staff and provide all of the things that go along with that, or if they should have the county provide an employee or staff for the GSA and then paid for by the GSAs. And that was what was included in the revenue and budget projections for both the Vina and Wyandotte Creek GSAs, where they would share in that cost. So they identified that a GSA program manager would be employed by Butte County and housed, that's misspelled, housed in the Department of Water and Resource Conservation. But this position, which we identified would be a full-time position, would be completely funded by the GSAs. Next slide, please. And that person would work on GSA work. And as you just saw in the work plan that Christina presented, there's a lot of work to be done. So as in your packet is the cost share agreement. I'll note kind of ahead of time, it's later in the slides, that the Vina GSA did approve the cost share agreement and authorize their chair to sign. So in the scope of services of the cost share agreement, it says that the county shall provide the services through employees or consultants. So there are a number of services that we would be providing, including the GSA program manager, but then some technical services as well, and serve as essentially the fiscal agent. The county shall appoint a single employee or consultant as the GSA program manager, which we will be recruiting and hiring for once this whole process gets through the Board of Supervisors. And the county shall provide additional technical services. And what we mean by that is some of the work that both Christina and Kelly have been doing with monitoring and data analysis. This cost share agreement does not include legal services because both GSAs do have their own legal counsel. And then the GSA would also fund some purchase of some of the office equipment necessary for this employee, the staff member, which would be a workstation and associated office supplies. And those line items were also included in the GSA's budget. Next slide, please. The county or the GSA program manager would be essentially responsible for the day-to-day operations of the GSA. They would serve as the primary point of contact. They would manage coordination between the GSAs, the member agencies, sub-basin stakeholders, et cetera. So essentially serving in the role that it's kind of taken a bunch of us to perform for the GSA. And all the duties listed in Exhibit A, the scope of work, which also identifies the compensation. And that work plan that you just approved would also be attached to the cost share agreement. Next slide, please. As part of the scope of services, the cost share agreement also states that the county shall prepare and provide a cost proposal for subsequent fiscal year for approval. So as each GSA approves their budget, they'll also know the cost of the GSA program manager and any additional costs for the technical services, as well as some of the fiscal services that the county will be providing. We utilize the county's financial software to help just manage the finances of the GSA. The GSA would share in the costs of the program management and administration. When we went through the budgeting and revenue needs for the fee study, we identified that 70% of the cost of the GSA program manager would be paid by VINA, and 30% would be paid by Wyandotte Creek. VINA and Wyandotte would split 70-30 the fiscal agent costs of the county, and there's a cost estimate for that in the attached to the agreement. And then technical services and the workstation office supplies would be kind of a 50-50 split. Payments would be made to the county on January 15th and July 15th in arrears. That way the county can kind of do half the year each. And so knowing, so if there's any changes, I don't know, if the program manager didn't like it and we had to hire a new one at a different rate, you'll know what that cost is going to be. And then the agreement also talks about all the terms, insurance, mutual indemnity, and all those lawyer provisions that are usually included in agreements. Next slide, please. The cost share agreement, with regard to VINA GSA, again, at their October 11th meeting, they unanimously approved, actually, I shouldn't say that, it was -1, so four fifths of the board approved it, with Supervisor Kimmelshoe abstaining from that, or rescinding himself from that vote, and authorized the Board of Directors chair to sign. This agreement is scheduled to go to the Board of Supervisors on December 12th, and so our recommendation would be to adopt the GSA Administrative and Management Cost Share Agreement. And I am open to any questions, comments, hopefully no changes.
Okay, is there any public comment?
None received.
Okay, close public comment. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the cost-sharing agreement between Wyandotte Creek GSA and the County of Butte.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 9.
Okay, moving right along. Somewhere in here, I have item 9, which is the GSA Board and Wyandotte Creek Advisory Committee meeting calendars for the 2024 calendar year. And so based on the different activities that Christina identified kind of in the work plan, as well as the work to be done with the grant projects, we have this calendar that's a little that is much less than what we've been meeting this past year. And so the Wyandotte Creek board meetings, we're recommending that they would occur in January, May, and October of 2024 on the fourth Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. And then that the advisory committee would meet in May and September on the first Thursday of the month. And that's not to say that we wouldn't have meetings. We believe that a lot of the GSA projects that they will be working on, they all have a public outreach and engagement process included in them. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for stakeholders within the Wyandotte Creek GSA boundaries to participate in some of those projects. So our recommendation is to adopt the Wyandotte Creek GSA board meeting calendar and approve the 2024 advisory committee meeting calendar as well.
Okay, is there any comment? Any public comment?
None received.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
All right. So the last item is just management committee updates. And Christina, if you wanted to give
I just
a-
hopped over here.
You did.
hopped up to the closest mic. Quick update. So Kelly in our office spearheads the annual report efforts, and we do have Ludorf Scaminini Consulting Engineers on board. They did the technical aspects of the reports last year, and we'll be doing that this year as well. So the fall measurements for groundwater levels are done by the state folks probably within the last couple of weeks in October, and so that data will be available. And so this is the 2023 annual report. So they'll begin to put those numbers together over the next couple of months. We expect it to go to the Butte County Technical Advisory Committee, kind of initial draft data in January for their discussion and review, and then draft reports in February to them. And then we'll bring, those will get finalized and submitted to the state by the April 1st deadline. And then it will get presented and reported out to your board as well as the WAC in the spring. So that's the plan, and work is underway.
Thank you.
Do we, go ahead.
Is there any comment?
All right. Are there any, did you want to just give a brief update about DWR's determinations that they just announced?
Sure. So as you know, the Wyandotte Creek GSA was in the July batch of groundwater sustainability plans that the Department of Water Resources kicked out the door with a determination on, and it was approved. They just kicked out another 17, I believe, today or yesterday. And it's a little bit of a mixed bag. There were a number of them that were approved, including YOLO and some others. Some of our neighboring subbasins were determined to be incomplete, including Colusa Subbasin, Corning Subbasin, Red Bluff, and one or two, Las Molinas, and maybe one more up there, Antelope, I think. So I took a quick look at the determination letter. One of the main first things in there was kind of a unreasonable assessment of overdraft. So some discrepancies in terms of what they reported out in terms of how much water per year they're in kind of the negative compared to really what they've seen over the last couple of years. And so therefore, if they didn't kind of reasonably characterize how big their problem is, their projects and management actions don't necessarily meet that need either. So there were a couple other things. Colusa Subbasin also included some need to address land subsidence differently as well. So that's the high points of, there's obviously a lot more detail there, but they have 6 months to address those deficiencies and resubmit. So they'll be busy doing that. Corning Subbasin did get, I believe, an $8 million grant, so hopefully some of that money can help them do this work in the near term. Colusa Subbasin, however, did not receive any grant money, so they're really struggling, I think, but also applying for other grant monies to do recharge and other projects. So that's the update, I think.
Is that a discrepancy between DWR's data and whatever the data was supplied to these subbasins from the different consultants, or
No, I think I shouldn't get into it too much, but I think it's somewhat what time frames they looked at. So, if you look, even I'll just speak to our plan, like in the VINA plan, the 50-year average is a much smaller overdraft number than the last 20-year average. And we talked about that. And that was the case in Wyandotte Creek as well. Wyandotte Creek is much flatter, no matter what time frame you look at. But so I think that's part of it, is just kind of what time frames and how they characterize things.
Thank you. I had
That's
a
it.
quick question regarding the hiring of the program manager. Where are we at in that process, and when can we expect to? There will be some board involvement in that, or the GSA basin, or you know what I mean?
Yes.
Involvement in that process?
Yes,
Okay.
there will be. So right now, part of the county process is we have to, the department would have to do a budget amendment, and we do a whole salary ordinance amendment, and then we have the recruitment. So we have been working with Stantec and crafting the kind of the stuff that goes along with it in the recruitment. So we're using a county classification. It's called the Program Development Manager. And then we've identified the things that are specific to the GSAs that program manager will want to know that they would be doing, and then the work plan, obviously providing them a copy of the work plan so that they could see what those activities are. We will be issuing, starting the recruitment process even before the board, just so you know, Supervisor Kimball, even before the board approves the department's budget amendment, so that we can start getting a list of names to start working through. And then once the board approves our change in budget, then we can officially hire somebody. What we anticipate doing is having people from each GSA as well as the county representing the GSAs in the county in the interview process, and then making a decision from there.
Yeah, I noticed that some of that information was missing from the agreement, so.
Right. Oh,
So it'll
the
be
process
good. Yeah,
of
that
hiring.
was
Yeah.
a good, really should have asked that before we approved it, but
No, we're just going to do it.
you're just gonna do, then just whatever you want to pay them,
Yeah.
just.
Yeah, in the agreement, it does give a range for the program manager, starting at like 78,000 and going up to whatever. But so there is that range, and depending on the experience, we can only hire at the county, we can only hire maybe 1 or 2 steps up in the however many steps there are. But after that, there would need to be some kind of board approval. So, so knowing that range is somewhere in there. So it depends on the experience too of where we'll start. So we wanted to give us some flexibility, so we're not just tied to one number, but.
Because I actually did read it while I was
Okay,
here.
yeah.
Fast.
Is there anything else?
No, that's it. You can move to adjourn.
All right, thanks, everybody. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you all for making the time to come today.